We had a very significant 1-hour meeting. I remember it all. And the message that I gave to the president was really, look, the world is watching. We've talked about this. You've talked about this. The question is, are you afraid of these rogue nations? To see, do you have the courage of your convictions? Nobody can predict. Not the Mossad, not the MI6, not the FBI, not the CIA. Nobody can predict. How do you know that no one's going to take a Molotov cocktail, throw it into a subway? You don't know. It's impossible to know. But I did believe that we were performing God's will.
4.5 years ago, we launched the History for the Curious podcasts, ranging over 3,000 years of history, from the Sinai Revelation to the French Revolution and the Holocaust, and covering diverse personalities such as the Rothschilds and the Rambam. This week, however, we have a very special guest. Mena, over to you.
Welcome to a special episode of History for the Curious. Before we start, a big thank you to our friends at Living L'Chaim, Yaakov Langer and his team for hosting it on their channel. We were honored to interview Ambassador David Friedman a few weeks ago in Rome. Trained as a lawyer and longtime advisor to President Donald Trump, he was appointed as the United States Ambassador to Israel in 2017, a position he held through one of the most consequential periods in U.S.-Israel relations. During his term, Ambassador Friedman oversaw the U.S. recognition of Yerushalayim as Israel's capital and the relocation of the U.S. Embassy, decisions that reverberated across the world. In 2020, he was named as the most influential Jew in the world. He was a central figure in the negotiations that led to the Abraham Accords, reshaping the Middle East and opening a chapter of peace and cooperation between Israel and the Arab world. He has been described as a driving force behind the historic shift in U.S. foreign policy. But what makes Ambassador David Friedman stand out even more is that despite operating at the highest levels of global power, he speaks openly of Siyat Dishmaya as the true force behind all of his achievements. It is rare to hear a figure of such stature attributing success not to politics or strategy alone, but to Hashem guiding events. Here's the interview. Ambassador Friedman, thank you so much for joining us here in Rome at the JLE annual gala dinner. You've had a front row seat to some of the most defining events of our time. Tonight, we'd like to go a bit beyond the headlines into the decisions, the values, and the vision that continues to shape your work and your goals. Rome is a city that for the Jewish people carries immense historical weight. It was Rome that drove the Jewish people into exile nearly 2,000 years ago, which began a long and difficult chapter in our history. And now, 2 millennia later, here we are. We're sitting with someone who's played such a central role in strengthening Israel and shaping our modern Jewish story. David, I know that you're a fan of history yourself. Why do you think Jewish history is so vital to study and understand? And what does being here in Rome personally mean to you?
Well, look, I think that one of the most important ways to validate our existence today is to understand the role we play in the world and the role we played in history. The continuum that goes back to really the beginning of the beginning. When I went to college, somebody said to me something I thought was very profound. He said to me, if you read the Bible, you would think it was written by an anti-Semite. All our warts, all of our failures are out there for everyone to see. It's not Greek mythology, right? It's not Roman mythology. It's the story, very human story of the Jewish people. We can learn a lot from it. We can hopefully not make the same mistakes. But most importantly, I think we understand that we're part of a very, very significant divine continuum that fortunately hasn't ended. It's come very close to, it's been threatened for thousands of years, but for some reason it just doesn't end. And, that's the reason why soldiers, when they get inducted into the Israeli army, where do they go first place? They don't go to Yad Vashem to remember how much people want to hurt us. They go to the Kotel. They see the Kotel, they see the Rabbi, they see the whole, runaway of Jewish life. And I think it's essential to understand that. It's essential to our future, not just so we don't make mistakes, but it's essential to our future because we really see the hand of God so clearly over that lengthy period of time.
In 2017, the decision to move the American embassy was widely considered impossible. Every US president before had promised, pretty much no one had followed through. How did you manage to overcome the resistance in Washington, particularly from the State Department, and the pressure internationally? It stunned the world. I mean, we're used to an age where politicians promise and don't fulfill their promises, but it was just such a huge comfort to the Jewish people. How did you manage that?
I had the benefit of of having a boss who was very receptive to the move, much less comfortable than a traditional politician with breaking a promise. And look, we had a very significant 1-hour meeting. I remember it all. It was, we had the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. And the message that I gave to the president was really, look, the world is watching. We've talked about this. You've talked about this. The question is, are you afraid of these rogue nations? Are you going to be threatened by, the PA, Hamas, any other country in the Middle East? Is that going to drive your foreign policy? Because people are watching. Not just me. To me, I admittedly, have a dog in this hunt. I feel deeply about it, care deeply about it. But everyone's watching. The Russians are watching, the North Koreans are watching, the Iranians are watching, to see, do you have the courage of your convictions? And that really resonated with him more than anything else. I mean, that was, I think, if I would say, the linchpin that got him over the top. It sent an enormously powerful message. Like, again, I have to separate my own personal feelings about it, which are deeply rooted in a love of Jerusalem. I had my bar mitzvah at the Kotel in 1971. I've been coming to Jerusalem since I can remember myself, walking. So that's over here. But it was a very, very powerful statement to the world. And President Trump got it. He really got it. And I think that motivated him. And I think during that first term, there weren't any wars. He inherited a bunch of wars, but there weren't any wars in that first term. I think a lot of it was because of the messaging he sent by moving our embassy.
At the time of the move, many predicted that there would be a large outbreak of violence, right? Many saw this as it was more than just symbolic. And it turned out there was a lot more restrained than what we could have imagined. Did you predict that, or were you also surprised at the lack of violence that followed?
You'd have to have an enormous lack of humility to predict, what would happen as a result. I mean, look, we did a lot of diligence, if you will. I remember sitting in skiffs. A skiff is it's a room that no sound goes in or go out. I forgot what it stands for. I used to know. But we had a box, 24 screens on the box. It was every embassy from Morocco to Pakistan. It was every security agency. We did this for a week, trying to figure out where. Nobody can predict. Not the Mossad, not the MI6, not the FBI, not the CIA. Nobody can predict. How do you know that no one's going to take a Molotov cocktail, throw it into a subway? You don't know. It's impossible to know. So I didn't know. I had great faith that this was something that was important. I mean, I've spoken about this. I think I'm going to speak about it tomorrow night, so maybe I don't want to speak about it too much now, but I did believe that we were performing God's will. And believe me, if it didn't work out well, I probably would have been fired in relatively short order, because it would have all come back to me, and everybody would have said, why'd you make, you took this symbolic act. We were already on great terms with Israel. America didn't need this to achieve anything. This was symbolic for the sake of a symbol and a campaign promise. You killed a lot of people. I mean, that would have been very unpleasant. And I couldn't be sure it wouldn't happen, but I was willing to take the risk.
You've been outspoken that the West Bank is not occupied territory.
Sorry, what's the West Bank?
Right, Judea and Samaria.
Yes, okay. Now I understand.
And I quote, "It is territory it captured fair and square from Jordan,
Yep.
when Jordan made the fateful decision in June 1967 to attack Israel." Although you could even extend the argument further by mentioning that it didn't belong to Jordan anyway, because it annexed it and only Pakistan and Great Britain accepted that annexation.
Correct.
But I think it's fair to say that in the political West, no one accepts Israel as having any legitimate claims to that territory. So how do you even start the conversation about this? And have you had any success outside of the USA in convincing people of the justness of this position?
There was a justness of the position, in terms of, law and history. And then there's also, another bucket of issues, which is, somebody's got to run it, right? And we're all sitting around collecting resumes of who's the best actor to run it. Well, we're going to run out of qualified resumes pretty quickly. It's not Hamas. It's not Islamic Jihad. It's not the PA. Maybe people say, well, the PA is not that bad. No, the PA is that bad. Okay, we know that they pay terrorists to kill Jews. They have a pension program that rewards terror. They've never condemned October 7th. I mean, they're as bad to me and maybe in different ways, but as bad as Hamas. So we've just run out of leadership. By the way, the Palestinians, many of whom I've gotten to know pretty well, don't want to be led by the PA, right? It's corrupt. There's no freedoms. There's no transparency. There's no real, commerce. There's no real opportunity. The education's lousy. The healthcare is lousy. I mean, nobody wants to live under the leadership of the PA. So who's left? Okay, so what player in the entire region actually has a history? Now, I'm now speaking from the perspective of the Palestinians. Forget about my views about Israel, which are well-known and heartfelt. But just in terms of the Palestinians, who in the region has a history of empowering an Arab minority to achieve prosperity, human dignity, education, good health? I mean, no other country but Israel. So, I make the point that, there's 6 or 7 elite universities in Israel. The Arab population in Israel, the Arab citizens are about 18% of the population. About 25% of the students at all these elite universities are Arab. The ethnic group in Israel that is the most prosperous are Christian Arabs. I have a dear friend who is the former chairman of Bank Leumi. He's an Arab Muslim. Okay, he's the head of the largest bank in Israel. So if you don't care, forget about the Bible and forget about Israel. And I don't forget about any of those things, but I'm just making a case to people who are secular, or people who don't want to hear about Yudav Shomron. They just want to talk about,
legalities.
Well, just want to talk about what's the best outcome.
Practicalities.
The practical outcome. It's Israeli sovereignty. Now, you can layer onto that, but, does Israel have a legal right to be there? Well, of course they do. I mean, they were awarded Palestine, under the San Remo Declaration. Palestine includes all of Jordan. So Jordan, the Brits took, no offense to your country, but the Brits took, 72% of Palestine off the top and gave it to Jordan and established a Saudi kingdom. They don't have any human rights there. The Saudi king, the Hashemite, whatever that means, he picks the entire, Congress. Nobody cares about that. Nobody really wants to live in Jordan. But that's 72% of Palestine. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about the 28% that's left. We had a great legal scholar in America who was the Undersecretary of State, who negotiated UN Resolution 242, who went on to become the dean of the Yale Law School, named Eugene Rostow. I'm sure you're very familiar with him. And he said that, by far the best legal claim to Judea Samaria belongs to Israel. So we, Jewish people, the Israeli government, I don't mean to be critical of the Israeli government, because they haven't known a day of peace in their entire existence. And, they have very strong different opinions, and I have no beef with the early founders of Israel, who didn't have a biblical view of greater Israel and, were largely secular, and we stand on their shoulders. I mean, they built the country, so I'm not going to criticize anyone. But this is really a decision, I think, for Israel to make. Do we have a chance of convincing America to go along? Yeah, I mean, they're talking about it today, I think, as we speak. I think there was just a press conference where Secretary Rubio said, well, what do you expect Israel to do when the UN recognizes a Palestinian state? Okay, look, I think America is the most important outside country, but the Israelis have to get their arms around this, have to have a real consensus, not a midnight land grab, but like a real thoughtful approach. And we can talk about it some more. I mean, I worked on this a lot in the Trump administration about what Israeli sovereignty would look like and how would it work. And I do believe, and that's why I wrote the book, I do believe that the best outcome for Jews, for Arabs, for Palestinians, for Christians, for Muslims, for Jews, is all with Israeli sovereignty over the entire region. It'll take years to settle that down, right? It's not like, Israel's going to be welcomed like a conquering hero, but I think ultimately that's the best outcome.
Moving on to the Abraham Accords, which stunned the world, right? Decades, US diplomacy followed the same path, which was assuming that peace with Israel's closest neighbors has to come first. For the Accords turned that approach on its head, right? Reached straight to the Gulf. Who first conceived of such a dramatic shift of policy, and how did you persuade others that such a thing would succeed?
So I'll take some credit. I'll give the most credit to to Jared Kushner, who I spoke with almost every day for 4 years, who I think developed relations in that part of the world that were unique, unprecedented. We spent a lot of time with those countries, with the Saudis too, and Emiratis and Bahrain, and I think Jared may have even spoken to the Qataris to some extent, although I didn't. I think it's important to say, look, they are interested. Leave the Qataris out for a minute because I don't know anything firsthand about them. The Saudis, the Emiratis, Bahrainis, they are not lovers of Palestinians. They are lovers of stability in the region. They are deeply fearful of radical Islam, which largely is embedded in Hamas, to some extent in the PA, to some extent funded by Qatar. So they are looking for any opportunity to quiet that down. We showed them our thoughts about how Israelis and Palestinians could live together. And, I think it's largely outlived its utility in the aftermath of October 7th. I mean, October 7th changed everything. But, what's important here is this, and I think this is the right way to look at the Abraham Accords. Look at it like a triangle, right? At the base of the triangle, you have Israel, and you have an Arab country. And at the apex, you have the United States. And in each case, the country, the Arab country, they're not all the same. They don't all want the same things. They want some things from Israel. They want some things from America. America has to be there delivering its part. None of these Arab countries overnight read Theodor Herzl and became Zionists. I mean, that's not what happened. We didn't give them Judenstaat and said, here, read this. And they have interests. Israel has interests. America has interests. It was a deal that was, I think, properly made by people with business backgrounds to understand, what could be given, what couldn't be given, what could be traded. And that was really the heart of the Abraham Accords. Now, to me, that's much more powerful than getting a particularly helpful leader in one country or another who, takes a stand, because the leaders come and go. These are agreements that are really based upon mutual interests. And I hope I never have to retract this, but they've held through the most stress you could conceive on these agreements. I mean, you see what kind of anti-Israel sentiment there is, again, not to pick on your country, but in London, in America, in all the college campuses, in France. It's not as bad over there. Now, it's not good there. I mean, there's a lot of stress. I mean, everybody there gets their news from Al Jazeera, which is almost as critical as the BBC, with regard.
Almost.
Yeah, I don't want
to offend it.
I don't want to, but so they have their news from Al Jazeera, and yet it's held. Nobody has made that demand. I hope that stays. But that shows you kind of the power of the Abraham Accords, that it really is driven off of mutual interests.
Shifting politics in Washington and the turmoil in the region and the anti-Semitism, as you just said, rising across the world, are they at risk of being diluted or even being rolled back? Because that's, I guess, people are discussing the Abraham Accords now. What will happen?
So what they say, after the destruction of the Second Temple, prophecy was given to idiots and fools, right? And so I am not in the prophecy business, because I hope not, that I'm not an idiot. I think they're going to hold. I think there's stress on them right now. Probably the Israeli attack on Qatar didn't help. It probably created some more stress. But I think they're going to hold. I mean, my feelings is that they're going to hold. I'm a big fan of Mohammed bin Zayed and his family. I think they really are kind of leading the Gulf out of, into modernity. We'll see where Saudi ends up. The Bahrainis have also been good. I think the Moroccans have been pretty good. So I think it's going to hold, but I would not understate the stress right now.
So last question on that. The dream of Saudi Arabia formally joining is still on the table.
I think so. I mean, I'm not in the loop these days. I think we would have gotten Saudi into the Abraham Accords had Trump won his second term and had, within 6 to 8 months. A lot has gone wrong since then. First of all, the Saudis, Biden comes in, the Saudis are watching America move closer to Iran. That right away pushed the Saudis away. Then, obviously, October 7th created all these very, very strong emotions on the streets everywhere. So I'm not sure, how to get back to where we were, at the end of Trump 1. But This is a matter of interests. It's not a matter of, no one's becoming a Zionist in the Gulf. Israel, as a result of the last 2 years of war, with all the trauma it's gone through, and it's enormous. It's still going on, and I hope it comes to an end. I hope the hostages are released. I hope the war ends. But Israel has gone from being a regional superpower to a superpower. I mean, the reason people are out there accusing Israel of everything you can imagine is because they actually believe Israel can do all these things. I mean, they think Israel has these supernatural powers, whether it was killing Hassan Nasrallah, killing Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the pagers, destroying the Iranian air defenses, flying 1,000 miles with the United States, destroying these are things that are
against all odds.
Yeah, look, they happened, obviously, so they were doable. I think they were somewhat miraculous, but I bet you most of the people who planned this, didn't think they were miraculous. They thought they knew how to do it. The point is that Israel is so powerful right now, and it's an economy, with all the stock market's still up and housing prices are through the roof. People are looking at Israel, in ways that Israel may not be looking at itself right now. But there is enormous, fear and respect for Israel. In the Middle East, I'll take fear and respect over love, any day of the week. So I do think that could drive a lot of diplomatic opportunities in the future.
A good friend of mine introduced me to Mike Pompeo.
Good friend of mine too.
Right. And I had a private meeting with him in Dubai, and he was very impressive. This is a two-part question. Firstly, how central to him was God and the biblical history of the Jews to his helping Israel? And secondly, I asked him whether any of the following three leaders actually gets it, or do they live in a delusional world and they are Putin, Kim Jong-un, and Erdogan? And what would your take be on that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I would say that he probably, Putin, Erdogan, and who's the last one?
Kim Jong-un.
Well, I think he thinks Kim lives in a bubble because he lives in a bubble. He treats his people horrifically. He keeps control through, a ruthless regime. You could say the same thing for Erdogan and Putin, but I think not to the same extent. I think Erdogan and Putin read the newspaper and, understand a little bit the world. Yeah, so I would say Kim Jong-un lives in a bubble. I don't think the other two do. I think the other two know exactly what's going on. I think they are always, pushing and pushing on doors and seeing how far they can go and trying to figure out which way the wind is blowing. In Erdogan's case, I think it's just how much can I align with, Iran to offend the United States. Now, how much can I get from the United States by pulling back a little bit around? I think he's always kind of juggling in all for himself and his, and for his longevity. I think Putin is the same. Maybe the difference between Putin and Erdogan, Putin does see himself, I think, as a historical figure.
Emperor.
Who may, who wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. So that's an ambition. I don't know if it makes him crazy, but it's certainly, I think he has ambitions well beyond his borders, which we can see now.
And Mike Pompeo's belief in God and the biblical history of the Jewish people?
So Mike is a man of deep faith. We made a movie together.
Yes.
And we traveled, down, Route 60, all the biblical sites. I think he was born a Catholic and became an evangelical Christian. And, like many evangelical Christians, their faith is very much textual. They kind of believe the Word of God is revealed to them in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And that's it. God's Word is immutable. It's non-negotiable. And I think he believes that. And I think he lives his life that way. He's an amazing person. He's a dear friend of mine. And I really love him.
You write in your book, just to quote, in the United States, no one is supposed to make public policy based on faith. You are a Shomer Shabbat, you keep the Shabbos, you believing Jew, and your diplomacy was shaped by your absolute conviction that Eretz Yisrael, Israel must belong to the Jews. It is our biblical and internal land. How were you able to be a successful, influential politician using these arguments, which you hold to be true, but are also based on your religious beliefs?
So it would be an interesting question if those beliefs conflicted, with an area where I thought, America was, had an interest. I mean, I'll give you sort of a simple example. Let's say, for argument's sake, Israel said, "Look, we don't want $3.8 billion of foreign military funding. We want $3.8 trillion." Okay, and they look at me, and or I would talk to the president, and I would say, "Hey, look, you can't afford it. It doesn't work. Nothing like that makes sense. I don't know what they're going to do with the money." I mean, there are kind of nuts and bolts issues where you can be an observant Jew and push back against the nation of Israel, or even the government of Israel, when you're kind of assigned the task of figuring out kind of the right place to thread the needle as between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, you could have a belief where to thread that needle. Fortunately, it happens to also be the right place, like independent of any theology. It's the right place to thread the needle. So I never really saw this in conflict. I also thought, look, I have observed for decades politicians professing their faith. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a problem for lots of other people in America. By the way, best example right now is Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee is took my job, very much with my support. He's a dear friend of mine. Mike Huckabee, will travel around Judea and Samaria. He'll talk about, when Macron said there should be a Palestinian state, Mike Huckabee said, "Yeah, make it in Saint-Tropez. That's a great place." Nobody accuses him of dual loyalty. No one's accusing him of anything. I mean, the guy, and I love to watch it because he can do things. I mean, I would do the same things, but I would get blasted for it because I'm a Jew, and because Jews have dual loyalty. Evangelical Christians, they don't seem to have that problem. 60 million of them, 5 million of us in America. It's great. I mean, it's all good. I mean, I'm not complaining about the situation, but having faith is not antithetical to being a good U.S. political leader at all. Look, we're not a godless country. Many people would like to make it a godless country. You can't walk into a courthouse in America that doesn't say, "In God we trust." The most transformational aspect of America is that human rights were endowed by our Creator in the Declaration of Independence, right? Every other country, the rights came sovereign. Here, they come from the Creator. That means that they're biblical, they're non-negotiable. This is who we are as a country. I mean, we were formed not to be a godless society. It doesn't mean everybody's got to be a Christian or a Jew or anything else, but I think in America, there's a lot of runway to be a person of faith. Look how the whole world, the whole country is having, memorials to Charlie Kirk. The guy, if nothing else, he was a person of faith. More than anything else, faith drove all his views on the world. So there's room for that in America, and I felt certainly not uncomfortable being a person of faith under those circumstances.
And generally, being a frum Jew in such a high position of power, did that work out well in terms of Shabbos, Pikuach Nefesh, all these different questions?
Yeah, listen, there unfortunately were 4 or 5 occasions where as the ambassador, I'm responsible for the safety of over 500,000 Americans living in Israel. I mean, I'm the one in charge, making decisions. Should they shelter in place? Do they have to be in shelters? Can they leave? So there were times, Friday nights when I had to get on the phone. Sometimes I had to get to a meeting. There were times when a war was imminent. I remember driving, but that was 5 to 10 times in 4 years.
Right.
Going along the personal path that you're discussing, you had a close friendship with President Trump long before the presidency. And in 2005, you earned him $23 million from a negotiation based on a phone call that you had. And you asked him as a bonus for a third of the amount when he asked. He was reluctant. You asked him.
He was serious.
Right. And you asked him how much he was happy to give. Yeah. And he replied 250,000. And you said, "Fine, pay that. And let's always be on good terms."
Yep.
Do you believe that your remarkable behavior then led to a basis of trust that he had in you and in giving you such a pivotal role?
It certainly didn't hurt. And it probably helped. Look, he is a businessman almost his entire life. He respects success. Look, I mean, generally speaking, getting close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, right? Right? So Getting close doesn't work. Like, I practiced law for 30 years. You tell your client, listen, the judge thought my arguments were brilliant, but he ruled against me. That's the only part that the client heard. He ruled against me. Couldn't care less about, only lawyers actually, care about, the quality of their arguments. Clients want to win or lose. So he appreciates success, appreciates people who are able to achieve success. It's not easy. And so in this particular case, it was very much something he hadn't expected. He thought it was above and beyond as an outcome. I think it made an impression. Like, I represented him 6 times, I think, in total, over a course of maybe 10, 15 years. I wasn't like his regular lawyer. The 6 times that I represented him, I won every case. And they weren't easy cases. And some of them I didn't think were even winnable. Had a lot of, as they say, siyata d'shmaya. I mean, now at the time, I had no idea. I just thought I was lucky, and I got lucky. And because I'm lucky, I got to collect a fee, and that's all great. Looking back on it, and how improbable some of these cases were, it certainly could have been, God giving me a little help, because I think it did make an impression. Remember, he told Mohammed bin Salman about, that I remember him telling him a story that I went to work for him, and I was such a successful lawyer, and he's got all the greatest people coming to work for him. And, and I was, I did all these great things as a lawyer, and now I'm giving it all up. And, so it does matter to him that the people that work for him are successful. And he's, by the way, I think in his second term, he's done a great job of cultivating a really great team.
It's an interesting point. You said that the main thing really is closing, because so much of politics is about who talks the better talk. And we've seen that in England with Keir Starmer being elected, and the mistrusts that's followed since.
Yep.
But Trump has had a lifetime full of business, and he appreciates closing more than anything. Really, that should be part of the political system. Someone who's had a proven track record, not just of speaking, of promising things, of actually being able to accomplish.
Look, 100%. Look, he's looking now at the economy, which, despite all our conversations, is always the most important political factor, at least in America. I'm not sure in other countries, but certainly in America. And what's he doing? He's saying, look, what does he think is the most important aspect of the economy? People got to buy houses. Because when you buy a house, somebody sells it, he's got money now, he's got money to spend. You buy a house, you buy beds, you buy linens, you buy all kinds of different things. It just lubricates a whole economy. And he's saying, look, the housing market is frozen because interest rates are at 6%, and he's beating up like crazy on the head of the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates because he wants to jumpstart the economy. Politicians don't normally do that. They look you in the eye and they tell you the economy is great when you're paying 4 times what you should be paying, for eggs and butter, He knows he's not going to convince anybody that something costs $10 when it costs $50. He's trying to fix it. And he's doing it in ways that politicians in the past haven't done.
The world knows Trump generally through headlines and social media, right? It's hard to get to know the real person.
Oh, it is. That is the real person.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. What you see is what you get?
You see is what you get. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
behind closed doors, he's pretty much speaking the same as he was on.
He may not be as candid, he's more candid, obviously, when you're sitting with him and a couple of people, having a Diet Coke. He doesn't drink, so the best you can get out of him is a Diet Coke. But he's more candid as anybody would be, when they're with some trusted friends. But this is who he is. It's exactly who he is.
So we're speaking at a time of extraordinary tension. There's the Gaza war, there's the US strikes in Iran, there's the bombings in Qatar. Many people feel the region is sort of on the edge of a much larger escalation, right? While others argue that crises like these can often create unexpected openings for diplomacy. From your vantage point, how do you see the Middle East evolving over the next 12 to 24 months? And what do you think the world is really preparing for?
So look, I'm very optimistic, and I hope my optimism bears fruit. But I look at it like this. Let's say you're a life insurer, right? And you're insuring 2 different candidates for life insurance. One looks great, runs 10 miles a day, but he's got, brain cancer. He's got brain cancer, doesn't know about it. But he looks and feels great right now. A year from now, he's not going to look so great and feel so great. But right now, look at the guy, everything works great. Unless you take a brain scan, you have no idea that he's sick. This other guy, 2 years ago, found out that he had brain cancer. He had an operation. He had chemotherapy. He had radiation. He had whatever he had. Miraculously, he's okay. Okay. Everything else is fine. The rest of him is fine. And the doctors are telling him, we think we got it. Okay. Who do you want to insure? Okay. Because this is Israel, right? This is the Middle East right now. It had a cancer. okay, a bad cancer, right? Okay. Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, metastasizing, right? And most of that has been removed. So I'm going with Israel now way more than I would go 2 years ago, even though 2 years ago, people were flying back and forth. Everybody thought Israel was the greatest, but they thought it was safe and wonderful and great, and it was, but the cancer was there.
You've been outspoken in favor of a one-state solution. Once again, I quote, "Can there be a two-state solution? The answer is no, and I know this because we have tried in the Trump administration for years." So what does your vision look like in reality? And presumably that requires Gaza without Hamas.
Well, anything requires Gaza without Hamas. So whatever ideas people have about the future, Gaza without Hamas is the first ingredient to anything. And I wrote my book mostly about Judea and Samaria because, the war was going on and it was just too new and too fresh to really, I didn't want to start making predictions there without any idea what would happen. I think Israel should take over Judea and Samaria, all of it, from the river to the sea, as they say. Said if Palestine should be free, let Israel be free from the river to the sea. Now, the question is, what do you do with 2.5, whatever the number is? It's debatable, but between 2 and 3 million, Palestinians. So what the book contemplates is this, and this is why it's called One Jewish State. Anything that provides the Palestinians with prosperity, with dignity, with education, with healthcare, with all the things that that go into a successful society, they should get, with the single exception of not being able to alter the fact that Israel is the only Jewish state. Okay, Israel, and I make the point in the book. Look, there's 22 minimum Muslim states. I think it's probably closer to 40, but 22 hardcore Muslim states. Okay, you wouldn't want to live in any of these places if you weren't Muslim, except for maybe Saudi Arabia if you were very wealthy and you're making money there, but or UAE. But basically, these are countries made for Muslims. Nobody cares. Okay, we need one Jewish state. Okay, there's never going to be two. God forbid there should be two. The worst thing that happened to the Jewish people when there was a single Jewish state under King David and King Solomon was that it split. We had the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. That was the beginning of the end of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So we don't want two Jewish states. We want one Jewish state, one single Jewish state in the land as to which the Jewish people have the best title than any other people to any other place on earth. Okay, that's it. So what does it mean you can't alter the character of a Jewish state? There are certain aspects of national governments which must remain in the hands of the Jewish electorate. Okay, that's it. Okay, now people say to me, well, you're telling me that you're going to take over this country, the Palestinians are going to have the same voting rights, identical voting rights to the Jewish people, or the Arab citizens that are already voting? I mean, the Arab citizens who are already voting, their status wouldn't change. But how can you do that? I said, I don't know, is America an apartheid state? I said, no.
And do you feel that European leaders believe in a two-state solution, or is it just lip service because they can't say otherwise?
I think it's the mother's milk of their Middle East policy, and they'll keep saying it until someone says something else. But it's the most harmless Middle East policy relative to the population that they have to manage, and that population is getting more and more difficult to manage.
The recent shooting of Charlie Kirk has shaken America and the wider world, not only because of the loss itself, but because of what that may represent. Political violence has always been a warning sign in any democracy, and here it comes at a time where debates about free speech, censorship, and intolerance of opposing views are already at a boiling point. Where do you see this leaving American society?
We're in a challenging place right now. I think the whole world is. Now, look, we've been there before, right? I mean, I was 10 years old in 1968, just old enough to see, the killing of Martin Luther King, the killing of Robert Kennedy. I think I was 5 when his brother was killed. And going back in history, there have been I think 2 other presidents that have been assassinated in our history. We came through it. We have something now we didn't have then, right? Which is social media, which seems to really, really dry out and inflame people more than, because it's anonymous nonsense that you can, 90% of the craziness is people that don't even use their identity. It's an issue. I think we need to keep an eye on the population much more. I'm afraid. Look, I have a lot of friends who are in the same business as Charlie Kirk, go out and give speeches like that. They're nervous. I mean, they should be nervous. It's the most important audience, frankly, are college campuses, because college campuses are almost by definition, far left. And the only way to get people to think about at least an alternative point of view, conservative point of view, is that the speakers come in. Now, they're already getting shouted down. I mean, they've been getting shouted down for years. Michael Owen got shouted down like 15 years ago in Irvine, California. But it's getting worse. And to me, it's, very much, I think in the short run, I mean, look, obviously, anybody with their head on straight should be speaking about idea tolerance, not accepting crazy ideas. But listen, people talk, and, there's some people who I can tell you, I cannot stand to listen to them speak. I get angry, but I keep it to myself. I mean, that's, people need to understand that, people are going to talk and they're going to say things you don't like. And your job is to respond with a countervailing argument. And we have to keep emphasizing, that's it. We win or lose in the marketplace of ideas, not on the battlefield. But it's going to take some time, I think, to get there. And in the interim, hate to say it, we need better law enforcement. We really need better security. That place in Utah was not well secured. And normally you wouldn't think, like in Utah, you have to secure every place. You have to turn universities into airports. I mean, it's crazy, but you can't make it too dangerous for people to come and speak. That we can't do. We can't give up half the narrative because it's too dangerous for them to speak.
Right.
You clearly have a very strong personal connection with Eretz Israel. You met an Israeli who was completely secular and who saw no purpose in holding on to Judea and Samaria, and yet you convinced him otherwise based simply on the Haftarah reading for Rosh Hashanah, that it was in Shiloh that Hannah taught us all to pray. You also speak of a sheep farmer living in the Golan Heights who somehow got hold of you and asked if he could bring the first wool shorn from his sheep, the mitzvah of Resh Hagez, to the US Embassy because you're a Kohen. He brought it and made the bracha, and when you asked what to do with the gift, he took it back, spun the wool, turned it into a talus which you wear daily.
Every day.
Looking forward to see it tomorrow morning.
Where does this connection to Eretz Israel start in your life?
I think it starts with my parents. When I remember walking down the stairs of my house in June of 1967, and I saw my parents crying, weeping. And I thought something terrible had happened. And I asked them what happened, and they said, Jerusalem's been reunited. They saw Rav Goren blowing the shofar. Maybe they saw it on television. I had no idea what it meant, but it moved me. I had never seen my parents cry before, and all of a sudden they're crying over somebody blowing a shofar 6,000 miles away. And that's sort of where it started. And they brought me there, all the time. I thought my first time was in 1970 when I had my bar mitzvah there. I went almost every year for, years and years and years and years. For my parents, sitting out the Holocaust in America, which is what they did. They're born in America in the 1920s. Sitting out the Holocaust was very difficult for them, obviously far less difficult than those who experienced it, but I think it probably in them created a lot of guilt. And I think the creation of the state of Israel right in its aftermath captivated them in ways that I'd been able to observe my whole life. It was just in our DNA. If you understand, going back to your earlier question about Jewish history, if you understand the history of the Jewish people, we've had a Bible for 3,500 years. We've only had an army for less than 1% of that time, and when you think about the privilege it is to be alive, now we don't control when we're born, but we've all been given this gift of being alive during the longest period of Israeli sovereignty over its biblical homeland in the history of the world. I mean, King David and King Solomon, they were 73 years, right? 33 and 40. If you count the Chashmonaim, I don't think that's the same thing, but another, I don't know, whatever number of years it is, but you have a very distinguishable. For Israel to have sovereignty over the entirety of its homeland, it's unbelievable. To live through it, to live through the last 2 years where Israel's been attacked on 7 fronts. And it's interesting, 7 fronts, right? Because they'll scatter in 7 different directions, right? I mean,
Talking about history, because I know we're short on time now, in our weekly history podcast, we've covered figures like the statesman and scholar, the Rambam Maimonides, the genius who was the Vilna Gaon, the honesty of the founder, Mayor Amschel Rothschild.
Yep.
All were great Jewish advocates. Who speaks to you? Who would you recommend for our next podcast?
If you get the Vilna Gaon, you should grab him. The Vilna Gaon and the Rambam are at the top of my list. Apart from the substance of their thinking, the absolute genius of it, just taking a step back and I would say I'm just astounded by Rashi, what he was able to do. I mean, in one lifetime, he did the work of 5 lifetimes in one lifetime without a word processor. We have such an illustrious, glorious history that, and thank you for bringing it to people's attention, because once you understand who we are, the majesty of the Jewish people, you're much more likely to want to be part of it. And I think you've done an excellent job of doing that.
Yeah, Master Friedman, just as a close, you've, with Hashem's help, you've helped shape the destiny of the Jewish people and the state of Israel at a truly historic time. Next week is Rosh Hashanah. We don't know exactly when this is going to air, probably afterwards. But as we reflect back on a very difficult year, what can you leave our listeners with? Perhaps an uplifting message at this sort of crossroads in history.
2 years ago, when we read Netanya Toguf, we had no idea what we were in for. The words were pretty empty relative to the events that transpired shortly afterwards. Now, look back on it, and we're going to say it again, and obviously everyone's going to read it differently and see it differently. I think God has certainly tested us. I think we've suffered enormously, but I do think we've passed the test. I mean, I really do. I think that how the Jewish people have reacted to something that we thought we were past. Meaning, so I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time, but people say it's the worst attack since the Holocaust. The Holocaust was quantitatively 5,000 times worse than October 7th, so they're not comparable. But the difference is we had the whole 1930s and 1940s to see the Holocaust coming, and we thought we were past it. We thought we were onto another type of Jewish existence, kind of halcyon days of power and scholarship, and we realized we're not. So the lesson, on the one hand, is we'll never have the strength on our own, the power on our own, to protect our own destiny. We can't do it alone. Okay, we need God's help, but we've gotten God's help. Okay, so on the one hand, God's saying, look, it's not just you. Let me be your partner. But at the same time, we've come out of this. I mean, we've come out of this with enormous success, enormous strength. Not as much unity as I'd like, but more unity than we've had before. And hopefully that unity will continue to expand. That we have no choice; it has to. And so I would say that as people approach Rosh Hashanah, obviously there is always trepidation because it is Yom Hadin. It's a day of judgment, and I wish everyone a K'tiva B'Chatima Tova, but also I think understand how we've come out of the last couple of years. It's been painful, it's been traumatic, it's been incredibly difficult, but we have not just survived, we've gotten stronger, and with God's help, we'll continue to get stronger over the years to come, and do so in a unified way, in a way in which we recognize God's enormous gift to us every day.
Beautiful. Right. Thank you so much. There's a lot to take in that interview, but what personally struck me the most is how openly Ambassador Friedman attributes everything to Hashgacha Pratis. On this podcast, we often recall great figures of the past, and therefore it's fitting to have him on as part of the long, winding journey of Golus, with all of its ups and downs. Before we close, a reminder that History for the Curious is generally an audio-only podcast available on all the platforms below, where we cover the last 2,000 years of Jewish history every week. Thank you for listening.